Bryan Kohberger traded a guilty plea for one thing, and that was his life. So 4 murder counts, 1 burglary count. In exchange, prosecutors agreed not to seek the death penalty. That was the deal. And that was the whole deal, in fact. But now here we are a year later. He wants to take it back. And if he actually pulls that off, the death penalty doesn't just stay in play. It comes roaring back. So the real question tonight isn't, can he win a new trial? It's, is Bryan Kohberger gambling with his own life just to chase it? So this is a part that should stop you cold, John. I don't think he's chasing innocence at all. I think he's chasing something entirely. So stick with us tonight, because every good true crime story starts with a 911 call. This might end with an actual execution date if we scrutinize it properly. John?
Drew, it's good to be with you here tonight. Bryan Kohberger back in the news. We were shocked, of course. It was over a year ago that he took a plea. We expected to have a big trial that would last a long time and would expose this Ted Bundy type killer. And what we got from it was rather disappointing. But Bryan Kohberger has been confined to a prison in Kuna, Idaho, this entire time. He's not been having a good time. I used to work at a state penitentiary, not the one in Idaho, but I think I'm going to have some interesting takes on what could be going on with him. Some of you know that he has not had a good time in prison, that he's asked to change his housing status. And we're going to break down those things, and I'm going to tell you what I think that he's up to, even stuff outside the prison. But before we do that, Drew, he's filed this motion apparently just in the nick of time to try to get a trial. We do have a clip from his plea where the judge asked him all of the critical questions, essentially. Do you know what you're doing? Do you know that you're going to go to prison? Have you had good advice from your attorney? And now he has to, all this time later, essentially say, just kidding on all of that, and he has to take it back. If you want, I can go ahead and play that. I have got a supercut of his plea just so that we can know what it is that Bryan Kohberger is trying to overcome. And I think with no small irony, we can see the confidence that he issued that plea with. And now knowing that he's taking it all back. If you like, I'll just go ahead and play it.
That is the dramatic progression. That is the timeline. Let me just jump back a little bit. Just let me give a little background, and then you play it. We're going to start with what actually landed in a courthouse this week, because the headlines are moving faster than the facts. It was Monday, I think, July 27th, and he, being Bryan Kohberger, filed a handwritten petition for post-conviction relief in Idaho's 4th Judicial District Court. So to be precise, because this distinction actually matters, this isn't an appeal. No. He gave up his right to an appeal when he took the plea. We're going to see that in a second when John plays the supercut. This is a separate civil proceeding. It's a different legal doorway entirely. He's on a clock of his own making, by the way. His filing deadline was the first week of September, and he filed it with about 5 weeks to spare. So here's the baseline. Everyone's tracking the stakes correctly. 4 consecutive life sentences, no possibility of parole, plus 10 years for burglary. And why is that, John?
Because he broke into the house and went into the house and killed those 4 kids in Idaho, which is terrible to do.
And he also claimed he understood what he was doing when he took that plea.
Right. Let's go ahead and play the plea, which shows him saying, I understand everything that I'm saying that I did. The court finds a factual basis in it, which he's also going to have to do some kind of undo on. And the prosecution also, it's not in this clip, but they also laid out essentially what their evidence was. But let's watch Bryan Kohberger take some kind of responsibility for everything he did. He seems free and clear as he did it. Watch this now, knowing that he's haha, just kidding, takes his backsies mode now.
Document outlines many of the rights that you have in this case should you not plead guilty. Did you understand those rights? Yes. They include a right to a jury trial. Do you understand that? Yes. They include a right to the presumption of innocence. Do you understand that? Yes. They have the right to require the state to prove your guilt as to each element beyond a reasonable doubt. Do you understand that? Yes. You understand you're giving up that privilege and those rights that I've just outlined by pleading guilty? Yes. Therefore, with respect to count 1, burglary, felony, how do you plead, Mr. Kohberger, guilty or not guilty? Guilty. As to count 2, murder in the first degree, as it relates to murder of Madison Mogan, how do you plead guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 3, Kaylee Gonçalves, how do you plead guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 4, the murder of Xana Kernodle, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Ethan Chapin.
Guilty.
The court will find that the defendant understands the nature of the charges, each offense, and the possible consequences to him of his guilty plea. The court finds that there is a factual basis for the plea and finds the defendant believes the plea to be in his best interest. I find that the plea was given freely, voluntarily, and was intelligently made. I accept the plea. I direct that it be entered.
So that's what he's trying to take back. I mean, that whole courtroom procedure, by the way, I cut it down to a minute of him just saying that, he pleads guilty to the burglary and the 4 murders. But when you confess to something, essentially you elocute to it and you take responsibility, it's not just as simple as the judge just takes your word for it. The judge kind of goes to bat on your behalf saying, like, are you sure you know what you're doing? Did your lawyers give you good advice? Are you happy with all that? And of course, all of that is to keep him from saying down the road the exact stuff that he's saying now. The court doesn't want to be dealing with this untidy mess in the future of saying, well, I had bad lawyers. I didn't trust my lawyers at the time. He made him come out and say in court, like, this isn't coerced. You're making this seems intelligently made. You signed this whole document. They went through this whole long procedure, and that was just what was shown in court. There was lots of stuff going on between the lawyers and between the judges. What I'm saying is that we did not get to this point lightly. He did not just one day wake up and just decide to do this. This was part of a long, coherent strategy that he was locked in for, that he agreed to, and that he said to the judge, I want to do this. This is what's in my best interest. And now, later, he's trying to take it back, Drew.
Yeah, we need to, and I'm glad you played the Super Cut because I failed to mention Madison, Kaylee, Xana, and Ethan. At the top of the show. That's always who we're always thinking of, and their families. It's unfortunate that Bryan is grabbing the headlines, which is something I think we're going to talk about in a little bit, and John has a very interesting take on. But that's what's on the books right now. Today, while all this plays out, there's no ruling yet. Nothing has changed legally. He's still a convicted quadruple murderer and a burglar. He pled guilty to it. John just played you the clips. The whole point of the judge doing all that, going through all those things, he read each charge. How do you plead? Guilty or not guilty? How do you plead? And the whole, are you doing this of your own free will? So what's he actually claiming? He's got 3 things. I'll walk through each one because he's not making one argument. He's stacking a few. He's stacking several, as a matter of fact. One of them is the ineffective assistance of counsel. He's saying his defense team that was led by that Ann Taylor, who is by reputation one of the most experienced capital defenders in the state. She's the one that probably negotiated that part where, hey, take the death penalty off the table and we'll be able to, maybe work a plea here. But 2, that plea itself wasn't knowing or voluntary. He's trying to make the argument now that wasn't knowing and voluntary. The words John just played, he's saying that it was induced. In his words, he's saying, I think he called them unkept promises and threats. And then 3, there's new evidence. Specifically, there was a hair recovered from one of the victim's hands that he says was never properly disclosed to him. So somehow that's a trial error where he thinks that he gets a do-over on this whole thing. But, this is very common with all these, cases that we deal with, the Sarah Boones of the world and I hate to even put her in his category, but they're the same. It's this level of entitlement, John, that, it transcends the legal system. We've lost the theory of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, people just assume, well, you raised just a little bit of doubt, and that's good enough for us. It's no longer like that. And now, this guy's pleading in open court to save his own life, to take the death penalty off the table. Now he's claiming, I never said that. It's like a gaslighting with his death penalty.
Yeah, it does feel like he's trying to take it back, and some people would say, well, isn't that kind of dangerous? I mean, if we go back to zero, if we somehow this hair evidence that he's talking about, which by the way is probably not even relevant. People have hairs on them. They're transferred there. It doesn't mean just because this evidence exists, it doesn't even mean it's evidence. It doesn't mean that it's compelling. It doesn't mean that it's relevant. It doesn't mean that it's something that would have even been introduced to this trial. It doesn't mean that there was any kind of Brady or other violation, that something was withheld from him. There just happened to have been a hair there. It doesn't mean that hair belonged to some alternate story of a killer. It's just extraordinary that he's going to seemingly take the risk of going back to zero. And what are we going to do? We're gonna haul him back to Latah County Jail and start the whole process over again. And all of a sudden, he's not a felon anymore. And we're going to go through the whole thing. It would be shocking to see that happen. I don't think that there's a lot of precedence for this, except in the case where somebody was, innocent and some kind of compelling evidence came forward, some, new technology that was discovered. This probably happened a lot in the 90s as DNA became a thing. But there's no stronger compelling evidence that's going to do this. And not only that, but like after everything we saw with him pleading guilty and sitting through the victim's impact statements, which we're also going to watch a clip of later, there didn't seem to be one iota of him, doing this under some kind of desperation. It never seemed like there was going to be any kind of real defense to this. The case against him was so solid. We never expected that there was going to be any kind of real rigorous defense or alternate suspect theory. We never knew what it was going to be because we never got to that point. But I don't know what he's thinking, other than some rather cynical takes that I will give to the audience whenever you're.
Yeah, John's got some hot takes coming up here, but we can sit with some of the specifics of claim 2 for a second, because this is kind of where it gets hard to believe. He actually alleges his own attorney told him that the plea, quote, need not be truthful, end quote, despite what he calls, quote, vehement denial of actual guilt. He said that in an article recently it was online, I think it was People magazine, that his family even said that they had consulted with him about that guilty plea. Like they had discussed it before he went in there. So now he alleges that they being his attorneys, promised him privileges after pleading, like contact visits, freedom of movement, employment. None of those things materialized. So now he's saying, forget it. It's time to do over. And he alleges that they fed him just like these elaborate lies about what death row actually looks like. And that was meant, according to him, to specifically scare him into taking the deal. And I think that's a bunch of hooey.
I think that it is too. I think that he knew full well what he was doing, and I think he was scared of dying. And I'm going to address a little bit of that coming up. So here's how he put. This is like how he characterized. This is how he put it in himself. It was a statement to the New York Times, and this is a quote, an open quote. "My actual innocence is my truth, and the plea, hinged on by false promises and blatant disinformation, must, in all caps, be withdrawn," end quote. That's not a legal filing talking. That's him talking, obviously. You know who else wishes they could get a do-over is the Mogan family, the Gonçalves family, the Chapin family, and the Kernodle family. There's no appeal for them. There's no second round for them. They didn't get any of those benefits.
They're right, and there's no. Right. There's just absolutely they can't turn back time. And this guy has the gall to just want to erase everything. Look, I'm a fan of the justice system. I know it has its flaws. I also know that what he's saying about being pressured into this is a lie. This is total Ted Bundy bullshit. And, these families have been put through enough at his hands. He pled guilty because he was guilty. So here's the part that operationally is the real problem for him. It's the paper trail. He's got to explain that away because he signed, it was like a 9-page guilty plea advisory. And he checked yes, entering the plea was free and voluntary. He checked no on any other promises influencing that decision. So the attorney, Ann Taylor herself, told the court on the record that she consented to her client entering that plea. And you saw that the judge was, like, he had to approve the whole thing, Judge Hippler. He didn't take it lightly. He asked Kohberger directly, just like you saw a second ago, by name, walking through all 4 murder counts individually. Are you pleading guilty because you are guilty? And he said yes every single time. He never said, well, I'm saying yes under protest, or I'm in duress. And the judge even told him in open court, I want to make sure that, your plea is given voluntarily, because I don't want you to plead guilty to a crime you didn't commit. Right? And that was his moment. That was his opportunity. So it's not a quiet signature on a form. This is like a whole sworn on the record, repeated confirmation. It was under oath, by the way, in front of a judge who was specifically checking for exactly what Kohberger is now alleging.
Not only that, Drew, but the guilty plea is so much more than what he had available to him. Okay, he also could have pled no contest, right?
Right.
That's no contest or nolo contendere. That's when you just say, I don't want a trial, right? You're not admitting guilt because you don't want to be held liable for that judgment against you at a civil proceeding coming up, which God knows you're not going to get blood from the stone that is Bryan Kohberger. No. But that is an option. You can plead no contest. It's the same thing as saying I don't want a trial. When you plead guilty, you're also saying I don't want a trial, but you're also saying, yes, I did these things. And so if he really just thought the best thing was to avoid a trial, go to prison for the rest of his life, take the death penalty off the table, no contest was always an option to him. His lawyers know that as well as I do, if not better. And he did not exercise that as an option, Drew.
If I remember correctly, too, in the episode that we did on the plea, so we did an episode on the 911 call itself, which I think is interesting because people always kind of attack the 911 operator for how curt she was. And we really kind of shed, John's experience and my experience, we shed a light on exactly why she was saying what she was saying and why she was saying it.
It was a confusing call.
It's a confusing call, and it's not to make any excuses for her. She had no clue that this was going to be a quadruple homicide that the whole world was going to see. But that
they didn't even know that. They weren't ready to accept that. They said it was an unconscious person. And then, the gravity was there that was confusing. Like, well, if this is, can you try to wake them up? And they didn't even want to go in the room because they knew what was going on, Drew.
Right. So all that aside, you can make the argument that, well, she should be acting this professional, at all times. Well, here's the deal. She's dealing with 19, 18, 19, 20-year-old kids who are passing the phone around. She can't get a straight answer from anybody. And somebody needs to be the adult in the room in certain things like this. So in hindsight, this looks like she's yelling at a bunch of people who are going through traumatic, looking at dead bodies and all this stuff. At the time, she's just trying to get information to keep them safe, to get them help, to keep the officer safe. And that's what 911 operators do.
A police officer exerts command presence simply by showing up in the police car and the uniform and the gun that's on their hip that doesn't even have to come out. The shiny badge, the diction, the way that they carry themselves, the way they stand. They give orders right away. But when you're over the phone and you're dealing with a situation that's fundamentally out of your control, all you could do is try to influence it. And your leverage for your command presence comes through by taking command and kind of giving orders what to do. That can sound mean, but you're trying to do something good, not something nice. You're not there to give them comfort for the 2 minutes you'll be on the phone. You're trying to get the information that's critical for officer safety and patient survival in those few minutes you're going to talk to them, Drew.
Okay, so that aside, we did that episode. Hopefully you'll go back and watch that. There'll be a link in the description. Then we did an episode about the plea itself. And we watched the whole thing. And in fact, we remarked that the prosecution didn't put a whole lot forward. So I know that what he's saying is well, they didn't tell me about this other hair. So that could have been my out, which is insane. No, but they didn't tell you about the Amazon people that they had lined up ready to talk about your credit card history. And they didn't tell you about, the digital forensic people that they had lined up ready to go through all of your checking the status of your order of the K-bar and ordering a replacement sheath and all these other things. So, fair is fair. If he's saying, well, you never told me about the hair. Okay, well, I guarantee there's an entire Pandora's box full of evidence that the prosecution never even had to bring up because
it never got laid out. But we could just cut to the end on this, Drew. I mean, like, does he actually, in his mind, did somebody in prison tell him that exoneration and innocence and a life outside of prison is possible for him? Does he actually think that this hair is going to completely overturn everything that's done? I mean, like, how did he get to this point where he thinks that this hair is so important? It's not going to change where you're at. Even if he had not pled guilty, that hair wasn't going to change anything.
So my John sense is going off. I have the feeling that you're about to unleash on what this whole charade is about. But the question everybody's kind of asking is, did he give up his right to fight this? And that's the part that surprises people. Like, waiving your right to a direct appeal doesn't waive your right to file a post-conviction relief on ineffective assistance grounds, because those are two different doors. The legal basis is there's a 2019 Supreme Court case. It's Garza versus Idaho. And there's something, by the way, we're not attorneys, so don't consider this legal advice. Almost ironic about that case is it originated in the same state. It was in Idaho, and it held that a defendant can always pursue certain Sixth Amendment claims regardless of a prior appeal waiver. So when he waived that right to appeal that we just saw, like when he checked those boxes, that waiver was real and it was significant, but it's exactly why his team, or in this case, like Bryan Kohberger personally, is walking through that post-conviction door instead. So does that mean he's got a real shot? I don't know. I don't think so. Let's talk about the actual legal standard, because this is where his odds are actually going to be exposed. So under Idaho law, the standard changes depending on the timing. Before the sentencing, courts can use a fairly lenient, like fair and just reason standard, and that's a pretty low bar. But once he's sentenced, which he was, that's exactly where Kohberger is right now, 4 life sentences and I think 10 years for the burglary. That bar jumps dramatically. It becomes like the manifest injustice. That's high. It's a very high standard. So to actually clear that bar, he has to prove one of two things. He has to either prove a material misrepresentation by his lawyers, or the state even, that made the plea involuntary or unknowing. And like, how tough is that hurdle, John? Because like you heard the constitution, I mean, the conversation between him and the judge, but on top of that, he's got to like show the reasonable probability that he would have gone to trial if not for those factors. There's no way he was going to trial. Like if he, look, maybe he was, I am the last guy in America that'll tell you like, yeah, the guy's already guilty. Like, you know, I don't like to predict, but I have a good idea where some of these trials are going. There's a trial going on right now that I've got a decent prediction on, but and it doesn't necessarily mean, you know, nobody should hold me to that anyway. But like it was pretty, they had pretty overwhelming evidence. Like, and you know what the other overwhelming part of this was? They put that guy in prison and the serial murder stopped.
Yeah,
you know, the spree killing stopped or whatever.
Right.
You know,
there's no more of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So go ahead. No,
you go ahead.
Oh, no, you hang up. I want you to, so listen to this directly from a law professor at the University of Idaho, where, oh no, he was at Washington, wasn't he? But anyway, this guy, Samuel Newton, he said on Kohberger's actual odds, he said, quote, "The chances are slim to none. It's incredibly hard to show, especially whereas here there's a thorough plea colloquy on record. So slim to none. You know, that's a source with no reason to spin it in either direction. So we can get into the piece of evidence that he's actually hanging this whole thing on. It's that hair that was recovered from Ethan Chapin's hand. But do you have something in between that you want to talk about?
I just wanted to say, like, suppose we even get back to the point where, you know, impossible, like he sets the Kohberger precedent, you know, like it gets named after him. You really think we're going to get to a point now where we have a jury somewhere to find that doesn't have an impression of Bryan Kohberger? The guy can't get a fair trial anyway. He's That's kind of what I'm going to unpack, is that all of this is really a cynical ploy. It's not really even about getting another trial. And I think that he knows that. And what I'll unpack is that he essentially has nothing to lose anyway.
Here's a little surprise about that hair, though, John. I don't know if you know this or not. Because he's trying to make this a big deal. He's trying to say that this is undisclosed exculpatory evidence, that, it would have exonerated him, and all this other stuff. And it's the kind of thing that would point to an unknown suspect. And yeah, this is the reasonable doubt discussion that we have all the time. But here's the twist, and it's a pretty big one. His own defense team already had a DNA expert test that hair, and her finding, it was, quote, morphologically consistent with the victim's own reference hair, which means in just plain terms, it appears to be Ethan Chapin's own hair. It's not an unknown third party, and that report wasn't buried. It was already included in a defense court filing in June of 2025, like a full month before he even, pled guilty. So this was hidden from me, that argument. It runs directly into a document his own attorneys already filed before the plea, showing they had it and they used it. Like it's BS.
Yeah. I don't think it's intellectually rigorous or intellectually honest to say that he's actually trying to use this or anything that has happened, especially the argument of ineffective counsel, to try to get a new trial. He's doing several other things.
I'm getting ready to open the gates. This is like a dog race. Like I can see John at the gate.
Because he's at the bit.
He's champing at the bit, not chomping. He's champing at the bit. He's getting ready to be released. But I want to talk real quick about what's actually competing for the court's attention here, because there's two legitimate interests pulling in opposite direction. Because on one side, it's finality, because at some point a conviction has to mean something, or this entire plea system is going to collapse. And on the other side of that, making sure the system never validates an involuntary plea, because that's a real constitutional interest. So manifest injustice exists specifically to referee that tension. It's built to be hard to clear on purpose. It's built to be the highest bar. Now, here's the part of the story I think is getting buried everywhere else, and it's the reason we opened with it tonight. It's what we do here. That plea deal is the only thing standing between Bryan Kohberger and a death sentence. So Idaho actively enforces capital punishment. I don't know that people know that or not. It's not symbolic law on the books.
Yeah, it's not like California where they don't execute people ever. Right. Idaho gets their people.
Right. So if a judge actually finds this manifest injustice and lets him withdraw the plea, so the entire argument just completely unwinds. It's not just the sentence, it's the whole trade. And prosecutors are released from their end of the bargain too, which means they can, everything's back on the table. It means the death penalty doesn't just stay possible. It becomes, it's probably going to be the predominant, I don't want to say goal. That makes it sound a little bit too ghoulish, but the ends, I guess, or, like this is the ends that would be justified by the means, I guess. Some reporting even raises a second layer on top of that. It's the possibility of federal capital exposure. So that one's kind of still developing. Like we can't delve too far into it, but the state level reversal is not in question. So here's the thing that I think gets lost. Simply filing for that petition, it's not going to breach the plea agreement. Under that same Garza precedent, he's allowed to try. He's not in violation just by asking. He's got stones the size of cannonballs for doing it, but he's put the entire deal back on the table to do it. So it's not a small gamble. It's the biggest gamble available to him. But just like we said in the episode of his sentencing, what does he have to lose? Like in John, with his prison experience, like not as a prisoner, but as, somebody who worked in a prison.
You have to explain that.
You do. But they're often the most dangerous, because what are you going to do? Are you going to put him in a better prison? if he offends in the prison and he kills somebody else, and, what are you going to do? Give him another death sentence, or another life sentence? So
Right.
Here's what I keep coming back to. Kohberger told the court personally under oath, he understood exactly how pleading guilty would limit his future options. He knew what he was signing away. So why risk it now with the death penalty sitting right there? And my honest read is because he's got nothing left to lose. So I think it's a risk calculation on his part. Now, John sees things a little bit more from the human side of things. Like maybe I've overanalyzed this or whatever, and I gave you the legal background for this. John, the gates are open.
I think it was important that you talked about the law part of it, because when you talk about this being a very high hurdle, how many times have you heard people pleading guilty and going to prison and then coming back from that? We need our guilty pleas to mean something. And if that's not the highest hurdle for someone who's already been convicted by their own plea, then trials mean nothing anymore. I mean, we're already dealing with a system in which we have, especially for capital cases, death penalty cases, where those appeals go on for years and years and years, and the family can't get any resolution or peace, what little is to be offered by the execution of a death sentence. But we have to have that. I don't think he's coming back from this. I think that you're right on the nail when you say, what else does he have to lose? But I think he's also looked at what's been going on in the criminal justice system lately. You know, if Karen Reed invented the conspiracy theory defense, Tyler Robinson certainly is going to lengths to perfect that right now. And this narrative that there's a hair out there somewhere that was concealed from him, and that this is somehow the hair that unlocks the key to the truth, that it was never him to begin with. That it almost makes you wonder, like, does he have a conspiracy theory story set up for how it's not going to be him? Because if Tyler Robinson can have one, why can't he have one? Not because it's the truth, but because it's sensational. But right now, where he's at in prison, he has nothing left to lose. That's essentially what's going on with him. This guy, you have to remember who Bryan Kohberger was before he was just the guy who pled guilty. Okay, he had a fascination with serial and serious offenders. And by taking this plea to avoid the death penalty, he decided not to die. He was scared of being put to death by Idaho. He avoided kind of getting into spree killer Hall of Fame status. He admired these guys. He admired guys like Ted Bundy. He wanted to be like them. But kind of at the last second, at the tip of the diving board, he kind of chickened out and walked back away from the pool. I think he wants another chance to go back to that. He has accepted that he has prison for the rest of his life, and he does not like prison. It did not work out as well as he thought it was going to be, and he definitely wants to feel like if he's going to be here for the rest of his life, he might as well have a higher degree of notoriety in exchange for that. I think that he might be trying to go back and trying to get his notoriety if he can have another chance to go to the courtroom. I'm not sure on that one, but even doing this is earning him some notoriety. But a trial,
well, it is. Here's what I want to ask you, though, because this is the era of documentaries. This is the Netflix era. So if this were Ted Bundy's era, and he had today's fast-paced electronics and AI and everything else to put together to edit a documentary real quick and blah blah blah, do you think that Bryan Kohberger feels like his plea took the wind out of that he's not getting his due?
It definitely made it less interesting. And the fact that Olivia Gonçalves, who I'm going to play a clip from her coming up next, she would be the star of his documentary, not him. She totally upstaged him during the sentencing. But yeah, I think that when he did that, he took all the wind out of the sails. He took away all the mystery. And certainly Olivia Gonçalves exposed him that he is not a mysterious or brooding, dark serial killer with motives that we'll forever want to study and write books about. Also, it's just not the 70s, Bryan Kohberger. We found you because you're an idiot. Back in the 70s, these guys were able to get away with it a little bit longer. We had you like on surveillance cameras, which is something that's pretty uncommon. But you had all the documentaries about you that you're ever going to get because he took the plea and because he made himself not interesting. And it's because he kind of surrendered. But if he can go back and have that trial, Drew, he can expose all of his crimes, and he wants that exposure. And he's yesterday's news right now. He wants to be today's news again. And so far he's succeeding in that because we're talking about it. But in his mind, if he goes back to trial, this is going to reveal his criminal genius, his criminal greatness. Like I said, he's not enjoying prison, and that's because he's not in general population. You know, that's what you see on lots of prison TV shows where all the inmates are all just going around talking to each other and not tucking in their shirts and all the stuff that drives me nuts about prison shows.
Yeah.
But it's because he's a nationally known person. They know who he is, but they don't respect him at all. And the reason for that is because he killed kids in their sleep. This is not a tough guy. This is not somebody who was moving heroin for the Colombians or something. He's nothing. He's what you call a punk. And a punk, by the way, if you didn't know, is the second worst thing you can be, succeeded only by being a punk bitch. But
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought a bitch was pretty.
well, you put them both together. And if somebody says that to you, by the way, Drew, it's a fight to the death. But right now, he's a perfect target for anybody in prison who wants to get what we call juice by taking him out. Juice is your reputation, it's your coercive power, it's your status among other inmates, and anyone else can get juice by taking him out. So that's why he's got to be locked up by himself or one other person in administrative segregation. He's not locked up where he is because he's on punishment, but just to keep him sort of out of the way. He says that he's being consistently threatened with sexual assault, and he's being verbally harassed by other inmates at all times. You cannot make other inmates stop threatening him. You cannot make them stop harassing him in a confined space. You cannot make an inmate stop being mean. I don't know if you know this, but there's no way to make them nice. He's currently on J Block on the Idaho Maximum Security Institution there in Kuna, Idaho, but he's not on death row. He's probably nearby it. Okay. Now, death row is on J Block, but the block is probably divided up into several sections. And like I said, he's in the administrative segregation section. I know this because I worked on our equivalent of J Block, where we had all those guys together, the guys that are kind of the worst of the worst guys, the most notorious guys. It's the same block, but there's different sections, okay? So Kohberger is actually stored, he's being warehoused with all the most annoying guys, the guys that cannot be in general population because of their behavior. They're disruptive in general population. They're bored all day on J Block, right? They're locked down 23 hours a day, and they have nothing better to do than to harass the guy, the little punk who killed 4 college students in their sleep because he wanted to be a badass. By the way, that is not the definition of being a badass in Idaho. He should have checked that before he did this. But
so, John, is his segregation like, is that more not because he is a badass, but because it's creating work by putting him anywhere else?
It would create work.
Yeah, he's about to be badassed, probably.
But he is extremely in danger of being a victim himself. He's being kept where he is. I don't think that he sought protective custody, but he's in a version of that. And by the way, just for more prison jargon, when you are in some kind of protective custody, whether you requested it or whether it's enforced upon you, you're also called what is a PC bitch, which is not a nice thing to be called. Do you see what I mean about this language that's being used in prison? Yes. Hide your children's ears right now. But what he mostly wants to do is something that inmates spend all day and all night, every day, because there's no hands on a clock. There's no pages on a calendar in prison. All they try to do is they try to manipulate the system into getting a new cell assignment. Okay. They want to have a cellmate, or they want a different cellmate, or they want to have a specific cellmate, maybe because that person has taken a liking to them. Maybe he wants to go to a quieter section that kind of reads as what Kohberger's up to right now, since he doesn't like being threatened and he doesn't like being harassed. But the thing is, you can't throw random people together in a cell. Okay. When they bring you to prison, they actually analyze you and your propensity towards victimizing other people, your propensity towards being a victim. And as I said, Bryan Kohberger is very likely to be victimized by others. So he can't be put into a prison cell with somebody else who's aggressive. They have to at least be neutrally aggressive for those two to even be allowed by policy to be in the same cell. And there's also Plea, which is legislation that I'm not even allowed to fully unpack for you because it contains the R word, which is not allowed on YouTube.
Oh.
But it's legislation that was passed by George Bush and Hillary Clinton to stop sexual abuse from happening in prison. So guys also have a score in terms of their likelihood to victimize other people or to be victims of that. So every inmate's got a score, and if their scores don't match, they can't be put together. So they have to go to these extreme lengths to try to manipulate this. And if he tries to manipulate his conviction status. Like I said, like best case scenario for him, since he has nothing to lose, suppose this means he goes back to Latah County Jail. I mean, jail is definitely a better place to be than J Block. But there's also another better place to be, and that's death row itself. Okay, I know what you're saying. Well, he did all this to avoid going to death row. He doesn't want to be put to death. Well, he's gotten a taste of what prison is like. He's a relatively young guy, and I'm not sure that he's definitely locked in to be in administrative segregation for the rest of his life. He wants to go over to that section because he's not going to be with the problem people. He's not going to be with the mentally ill guys who frequently have hygiene and behavioral issues. If he goes over to death row, he's going to be over there with guys that tend to be older and quieter. Like I said, appeals for these guys, they take 20 years. You know, so they're there for a long time. They're generally more calm. They're generally better behaved. It's a better neighborhood. These guys don't have anything left to prove. They're not trying to get any more juice. They're trying to be left alone and usually trying to do some sort of legal paperwork while they're working on their appeals.
Is it status though, John? Is it like the major leagues? If you're
there's status there too, right? Like I said, these guys don't have to prove themselves. And if he could get to the point where he's a death row inmate, he will be taken seriously. All of a sudden, you know, his reputation being inside prison as this guy who slayed children in their sleep, it won't matter so much because now, you know, everything will have come out in trial. The inmates will know what's in the trial, and he'll have a date with the needle, and that gets you a certain kind of status that he's probably looking for. But it could just be as easy as having a consistent, stable apartment with nicer neighbors. I mean, it's hard to believe that, but that's generally something that really does motivate inmates in prison. They don't want to be around the people that are treating them badly. They want to go someplace where it's more quiet. And this is kind of my big take that is kind of indefensible because I don't know Bryan Kohberger. I don't know that he wants to live there in the Idaho maximum correctional facility the rest of his life. He could be one of these guys that's looking down a very, very, very long road, and he might be deciding he doesn't want to go down that road. But he also might be someone without enough gumption and conviction in order to arrange his own personal shortcut. There are inmates who are actually afraid to do that. But, you know, by giving up on that trial, he bypassed the chance to exploit all this salaciousness. And now he's just bored and he's irritated and he's forgotten and he wants to be relevant again. But I think he's also trying to overcome a narrative, Drew.
Yeah. So, I had a question about the how it looked. Okay, so you talked about juice, and are there any unwritten rules for somebody that's on death row? In other words, like, yes, you would probably get juice because this guy's wildly popular, and you would now be infamous for the one that killed Bryan Kohberger, and you'd probably get, you know, maybe a death sentence yourself. But is there like the honor among thieves that says, don't bother killing that guy, he's going to die anyway? Is there anything, is that a crazy notion?
There's sort of an inmate emeritus status that comes to it, is that you're not like the others. And like I said, if you want to, one time we literally needed to take a guy on death row to get his teeth cleaned. And we had to lock down the entire prison so that wherever he went, when he left our equivalent of J Block and went to the dentist, the entire prison was locked down for this. Okay, so that's the level of prestige that you have, that when you want to go somewhere, everybody else is locked up. That brings me to a bigger question. Why are we cleaning the teeth of a person we're going to be putting to death? I don't know. I never got an answer to that. I never understood it. But if he does this, he gets to be somebody. But I also think he wants to overcome a narrative, and he wants to set out to do something that he was the same goal that he had from the start, from the moment he was waiting for his Amazon package to be delivered, in the morning and the night that it finally was, and he set out. You got to remember, this is a guy, Bryan Kohberger's a guy that wanted to victimize these 4 kids and their families before it was personal, right? He wanted to go out and victimize these kids before he even really had a reason to. But the thing is that now he's got a reason, and I'm going to show you that reason. And it's because not only has his self-image been tarnished, his image as a threatening, you know, spree killer been tarnished, his image as an inmate has been tarnished. It's largely because of this interaction that he had. This is the victim impact statement of Olivia Gonçalves, and this is the narrative he wants to undo, because this was the last word on Bryan Kohberger Enjoy.
I'll stand here and give you what you want. Disappointments like you thrive on pain, on fear, and on the illusion of power. I will call you what you are. Sociopath, psychopath, murderer. The only thing you failed more miserably at than being a murderer is trying to be a rapper. If you were really smart, do you think you'd be here right now? What's it like needing this much attention just to feel real? You're terrified of being ordinary, aren't you? If you're so powerful, then why are you still hiding, defendant? And that darkness you carry, that emptiness, you'll sit with it long after this is over. That is your sentence. And it was written on the wall long before you ever pled guilty. You didn't win. You just exposed yourself as the coward you are. You're a delusional, pathetic, hypochondriac loser who thought you were so much smarter than everybody else. You wanted so badly to be different, to be special, to be better, to be deep, to be mysterious. You found yourself thinking you were better than everyone else. Lurking in the shadows made you feel powerful because no one ever paid you any attention in the light. You thought you were exceptional, all because of a grade on a paper. You thought you were elite because your online IQ test from 2010 told you so. All of that effort just to seem important. It's desperate. There is a name for your condition, though. Wannabe. The truth is, you're basic. You're a textbook case of insecurity disguised as control. Your patterns are predictable. Your motives are shallow. You are not profound. You're pathetic. You aren't special or deep, not mysterious or exceptional. No one is scared of you today. No one is intimidated by you. No one is impressed by you. No one thinks that you are important. The scariest part about you is how painfully average you turned out to be. You're as dumb as they come. Stupid, clumsy, slow, sloppy, weak, dirty. Don't ever try to convince yourself you mattered just because someone finally said your name out loud. You want the truth? Here's the one you'll hate the most. If you hadn't attacked them in their sleep, in the middle of the night, like a pedophile, Kaylee would have kicked your fucking ass. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was the last bit on Bryan Kohberger. That defined him. He's still getting all of that, but now it's coming from a guy who's got a spider tattooed on his neck, right? Like that's the situation for him in prison. He's getting treated that way. It was bad enough being called to the carpet by, a 20-something-year-old girl saying that my female friend, my sister, would have kicked your effing ass. Now there's people out there saying, I can do this, like they're lifting weights and doing the thing where they put their fingers in the crack in the wall and doing pull-ups. Okay. That's who he's dealing with now. And they're doing the little kiss motion, and it's really bothering him, but he wants to get revenge for this moment. He hated those kids enough to do something against them. I don't know if you want to call it hate, like in an emotional sense, but he's that kind of a person that would kill 4 kids, but now he's got a reason. And it's not about getting out of prison. It's not about hurting any more kids. It's about putting Olivia and the rest of those families in the position where they would have to do legal battle with him again. For him, that will be enough of a revenge, because they feel at peace. They feel good. They humiliate him. They dropped a huge diss track on his ass, and he just wants to put all those family members back in the situation where they would have to do it again, or they would have to be in some kind of jeopardy about the future status of the justice that came for those 4 kids. I think he has nothing to lose, and he wants to get back at him, Drew.
I think if you wind back, I'm not suggesting you do it, John, but our viewers, I think if you wind back and you look at the attorney to his left,
I know they're like, oh,
I think she's holding back some laughter, like meaning not in the sense that like, not in the sick burn sense, but kind of like,
did you see one of the
nailed him
was clapping under the table when she walked away? Rewind for that.
All right. Well, I'll tell you, John, whatever's actually driving this, whether it's innocence or notoriety or something even darker, what doesn't change in this whole thing is the legal math. He's actually asking a judge to undo a deal that kept him off of death row on a like these experts call this standard slim to none to achieve. So using using evidence his own team already tested. They already had it. They already put it in filings. So we'll be watching the docket, John. I hope that, I know that they have to entertain this, but when there's a ruling, we'll be back to cover it. But, I just, in a sense, for the families of Madison, Kaylee, Xana, and Ethan, that they don't even entertain this guy. Like, don't give this piece of shit his 15 minutes. Like,
I just hope they don't actually take him to the courthouse in Ada County to talk to anybody. You'd be surprised too that what an inmate will do for a field trip just to be loaded up and to walk out of the prison for any reason is rewarding to them. And if he gets to leave the facility on a transport van and see the sky, that will have been worth it to him to file these papers. And unfortunately, that's the threshold for entertainment for him, that doing anything at this point is rewarding for him. But I am hoping that the judge and the criminal justice system will be wise about that. I hope that the court sees that it's in the interest of the state of Idaho, meaning the people of Idaho. It's in the interest of the court. It's in the interest of the family and the victims, that we stand by what we did. I'm big into the Constitution. Inmates, convicted felons have diminished rights and access to the Constitution. He voluntarily gave up those things in a classic move. The pleading guilty to avoid the death penalty is an absolutely normal thing to do. And I don't think that anything that he did was out of bounds, except for asking for another at-bat at this. And I'm hoping that it all just goes away quickly. Unfortunately, the wheels of justice turn so slowly that this is all going to be entertaining for a while, and he'll make his way around in the news, and people will be talking about Kohberger when they're bored of other things. But we need to get this guy back to obscurity and back into his hole in the ground, and back to a place where he's not even worth another Netflix documentary as soon as possible, Drew.
John, I have an alternate channel. It's called Detective Baxter. I want you to go look at that. It's on YouTube. It's kind of a light, fun, on the borderline of educational body cam channel. And it's youtube.com/@Detective Baxter. I know that you, with 911 calls being a mostly audible medium, that you do God's work on our Spotify account. What do you have going on?
Yeah, you can check us out on Spotify. The 911 calls are good enrichment for a traditional style podcast. It is video, so like you'll still see sight gags from me, and you'll still see my beautiful face if that's really a driving force for you. It is subscriber only content. I'm trying to use that as a way to just, saving lives doesn't pay all the bills. You know what I mean? That's why I'm here to begin with. So if you like what I do and you're looking for a more traditional podcast and you want to hear me as a 911 dispatcher taking on some of true crime's greatest cases, this is where you're going to want to do it. I dropped an episode for free this week, Drew. It's about the weepy voiced killer. This was 911 calls coming from a serial killer in 1980 in Minneapolis. So it has all those great classic true crime vibes. Detectives in the 80s. Everybody's wearing very ugly clothes. But Cigarettes. This guy would kill people, and then he would dial 911, right? They're not writing letters to the San Francisco Chronicle anymore. They're not sending letters to the chief constable in London like he's Jack the Ripper. No, he's annoying the 911 dispatcher, and he's calling up and he's crying like he's a little baby. Please, somebody stop me. I play all his calls. I play them for their psychological value, but I also rip him apart as especially annoying. It's just one example of many cases that I'm taking on the Spotify. That one's for free. You can listen to it now. Try it out. See if you like it, and if it's worth it to you. You can drop me $5 a month, and for that you get 12 episodes, and I think it's worth it. But you should also check out Drew's channel. Again, still an all-time favorite, Drew. You're dropping lots of great content over there, but I love it when the officer gets the lady for having the cell phone in her hand. She got a stub there. It's a good episode. So make sure you check that out. Anything else before we go, Drew?
Nope, that's it. I'm glad everybody was here. Thank you all for your super chats and your buying memberships. For everybody else, spread the word, tell your Aunt Sally, and we can't thank you all enough.
Yeah, thanks to our international fans, by the way. Every single person that dropped money tonight is not in America. Where are our countrymen at? Come on, guys. We lead the way. We went to the moon. We got the money to spend. Why do we got Canada and Australia showing us up? We appreciate everybody for watching. It really isn't about the money. Thanks for your generosity. Thanks, everybody. You all have a good night.
911 emergency, police or paramedics.
He's going westbound on foot. Westbound on foot.